Well, hello, Hearth and Homies. Thank you for joining us for this special live stream edition of Secrets of Scotland Yard. That's right. We're continuing our Streamathon Telethon with this special compilation. That was an independent show made in England from 1949 to 1950. And then it came over to the US in 1957 on the Mutual Broadcasting Network. Now, this show was produced during a time when crime dramas were all the rage. And of course, two popular ones featuring Scotland Yard were Whitehall 1212 and The Black Museum. And here comes another one. Initially, the show was hosted by Clive Brooke. And sometimes there would be a discussion with Percy Hoskins, who was a crime expert and a reporter for the London Daily Express. One of the things this show strove for was accuracy and authenticity. Now, when Whitehall 1212 came out and The Black Museum came out, they featured many times the same cases, just dramatized differently with different actors, obviously different production companies. This show is kind of seen as the predecessor of both of those shows, many regard it as the prototype. So I think if you're not familiar with the show, you're really going to enjoy it, especially if you enjoy Whitehall 1212 and The Black Museum. And of course, we've given this show the OTR Visual Radio treatment to give you a unique old-time radio viewing experience. Now, just before we get into the show, I need to tell you a little bit about our Streamathon Telethon and what we're trying to do. We've got these live stream events set up. We're trying to reach 1,000 members of the Johnny Dollar Club. Now, that's a huge goal. It'd be amazing if we hit it. Hearth and Home Entertainment is entirely supported by viewers like you. And one of the ways we're doing that is through the Johnny Dollar Club. That's right. For starting at just $1 a month, you can help support the channel and you'll also get access to exclusive content. Now, one other way you can help support the channel is by sponsoring a video. If you have a business or you just want to sponsor a video, go ahead and contact me through the email links on the About section of our channel page. And as far as the Johnny Dollar Club, you know what to do. Look for the links in the description below or over in the chat or in the comments. And you can either go to Patreon or buymeacoffee.com and join the Johnny Dollar Club starting at just $1 a month. Of course, don't forget, another way to support the channel is if you like this content, subscribe. If you like the video, go ahead and give it a like and turn on the notification bell so you'll know when another show goes live. Thanks so much for joining us for this Streamathon Telethon. And if you're catching it in the replay, you can still join the Johnny Dollar Club. That's okay. Make sure you stay tuned after this show for more fun events. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
How do you do? This is Clive Brooke. Today I want to tell you something about the Special Branch of Scotland Yard. I expect you've heard of it. Judging from some detective novels, you'd imagine it consisted of a group of super Sherlock Holmeses who are called in when everything else has failed. But that is not true, is it, Percy?
No, Clive. The Special Branch of Scotland Yard is a unit of a couple of hundred men who specialize in political crimes. They differ from their colleagues of the Criminal Investigation Department in that they must be able to speak several languages.
In fact, the function of the Special Branch in official language is to guard the security of the state.
Or, as the boys themselves put it, to clear up political nuisances.
So today, a Special Branch man may find himself guarding the King or the Prime Minister, probing the antecedents of political refugee who seeks the protection of British nationality, tracking down the perpetrators of a bomb outrage, or sauntering among the guests at a royal garden party.
Clive, why don't you tell them the story of the absent-minded professor?
All right, Percy, I will. It's a story which shows the far-reaching significance of political crime and how, wherever an international conspiracy may start, sooner or later its tentacles will come within the reach of the long arm of the Special Branch of Scotland Yard. Ottawa, Canada, September 1945. One war is over, but for at least one of the great powers, another war, a secret war of information, a nerve war, has never ceased. It is late in the evening, and the offices of the Canadian Ministry of Justice are almost deserted. The last few employees are on the way home, and one of the officials is evidently trying to get rid of a late visitor.
Coming in to see us, sir, but I'm afraid there's really nothing I can do about it. Why don't you write us a letter?
You don't understand.
I'm very sorry, sir, but I'm afraid I have to go now.
Okay.
Thanks for calling
But
in.
please.
I'm very sorry. Phew, I thought I'd never get rid of that guy.
What do you want?
Oh, some screwball. Said he came from the Soviet embassy. Wanted to show me some secret documents.
You're kidding.
No, but I guess he was. Tried to tell me all about some fifth column. Crazy guy.
What's his name?
Oh, I don't know. Here's a slip he sent in. Igor G.O.U. Guzenko.
Igor Guzenko, 25-year-old cipher clerk, employed in the code room of the military section of the Soviet embassy in Ottawa. Igor Guzenko, a man whose story was to shock the world, a man whose information was to bring to justice traitors of three nations who had endeavored to betray the Allies' greatest secret, the atom bomb. But this September night, Igor Guzenko is finding it very hard to tell his story. Nobody believes him. And yet all the time he knows that at the Soviet embassy his desertion will have been discovered. Already his one-time colleagues will be moving into action against him. What can he do? To whom can he turn?
Inspector McLean. Where? Who's that? Guzenko's. Well, who are these guys breaking in? From the Soviet embassy. Searching the place, eh? Well, listen, have you traced Guzenko? Oh, you picked him up. Oh, he wanted to be arrested. Well, don't blame him. Well, now, listen, hold on to Guzenko and all his papers. Get hold of his family and don't let anybody see him. Yeah. Well, move him out of town and come back to me for instructions. Now, remember, nobody must see Guzenko.
In a matter of hours, it was clearly established that not only were Guzenko's documents genuine, but that they included copies of 4 recent and secret telegrams exchanged between the British and Canadian governments on highly confidential matters.
And realizing the complete freedom which exists in Canada, and convinced that the Communist Party in democratic countries has changed long ago from a political party into an agency net for the Soviet government, a fifth column in these countries to meet a war, I decided that I could no longer serve my government, but must at last speak the truth.
The Canadian police authorities found in Guzenko's documents a fascinating story of how, in secret code, the Soviet military attaché in Ottawa had given information and received instructions from Moscow.
Message to Subaltern Ottawa. Your immediate objectives are 1. The atomic bomb, its composition and technological processes. 2. A sample of uranium-235. 3. The library and secret documents of the National Research Council. 4. Latest developments of electronic fuses for shells, radar, and a super explosive known as RDX.
Subaltern to Moscow. Facts are given by Alec. 1. The test of the atomic bomb was conducted in New Mexico. The bomb dropped on Japan was made of uranium-235. 2. Alec handed over to us a sample of uranium-235. 3. Alec has also reported brief data concerning electronic shells. There is in the shell a small radio transmitter with 1 electronic tube, and it is fed by dry batteries. The body of the shell is the antenna.
Moscow to Sabotan. Work out and telegraph arrangements for the meeting and password of Alec with our man in London.
Sabotan to Moscow. Alec will work in King's College, Strand. Meetings October 7, 17, 27 on the street in front of the British Museum. Time 11 o'clock in the evening. Identification signed, a newspaper under the left arm. Password, best regards to Moscow.
But even Moscow realized that their boys in Britain might have rather a busy evening identifying Alec from the number of Londoners with newspapers under their arms in Museum Street at 11 o'clock in the evening. They replied,
Arrangements not satisfactory. Correction. Facing British Museum. Intersection Great Russell Street, Museum Street. Time, 8 o'clock, October 7, 17th, 27. Identification signs. Alec will have under his left arm the newspaper Times. The contact man will have in his left hand the magazine Picture Post. Convey instructions to Alec.
Convey instructions to Alec. Who was Alec? The Canadian police authorities at once placed the facts of this alarming leakage of atomic secrets before Prime Minister Mackenzie King. Realizing the grave implications of the plot, Mr. King hastened to Washington to acquaint President Truman with the situation. 4 days later, the Canadian Prime Minister crossed the Atlantic and repeated the story to British Premier Mr. Clement Attlee. Officials of British military intelligence were called to Downing Street. The investigation was entrusted to Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Burt. Burt, a pre-war yard chief, was seconded to the War Office at the beginning of the war for anti-sabotage work. Incidentally, today he's back at the yard in command of the Special Branch. The Colonel's immediate and priority mission was to identify Alec.
Well, I don't expect we shall have much trouble finding out who Alec is. Our main problem is going to be to get him, to find out how much he knows, and, even more important, how much he has told.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's have a look at those cables again. Here we are. Alec will work in King's College, Strand. Give me the phone directory.
Here we are, sir.
Thank you. Okay. King's College, Temple Bar 5651. Hello, King's College. Put him through to the principal's office, will you? Thank you. Hello. This is Lieutenant Colonel Burt of the War Office. I wonder if you could help me. It's just a routine inquiry. I want to know whether you have on your staff at the moment a physicist who has recently worked in Canada. Yes, that's right. Oh, up to a few months ago? You have? Oh, good. I see, yes. Yes, that's right. He went with a research group on a project in Montreal, and he's just come back to London. Good. Now, what's his name? Dr. Nun May. Thank you, that'll be all. Sounds like our man.
And October the 7th looks like our day, sir.
4 days from now, we'll have to get busy. As October the 7th approached, a number of well-built but unobtrusive men began renting rooms in Museum Street. Rooms with first-floor windows which looked out onto the forecourt of the British Museum. In this and many other ways, known only to MI5 and the Special Branch, every inch of the place of rendezvous was covered by one or two observers.
Inspector Burt?
Sergeant Wilson here, sir.
All right, Wilson. I know you haven't seen him.
Not a sign, sir.
That's not surprising. I've just had a report from the man who shadowed him from King's College. He left there at 6:30, went straight home, had supper, and according to his last call, he's now sitting in front of the fire, doing guess what?
Search me, sir.
Playing patience.
Playing patience. And if anybody knows how to play patience, it's the men of the Special Branch. On October the 7th, they drew a blank, but they still had 2 more chances. Dr. Nun May was shadowed constantly, but always unobtrusively. On October the 17th and again on the 27th, the watchers by the British Museum kept their vigil. But Dr. Nun May did not keep his appointment.
It's no use, Wilson. He must have been warned.
Do you think he's suspicious, sir?
Oh, he may know he's being watched, but I don't think so. Not yet, anyway.
What do you mean, not yet, sir?
I think it's about time Dr. Nun May and I had a little talk. I'm going round to King's College. How do you do, Professor? My name is Burt, Inspector Burt of Military Intelligence.
How do you do? Military intelligence, did you say?
Oh, that's right. I don't want to waste your time, Professor, so I'll come straight to the point. Are you aware that there's been a leakage of confidential information in Canada relating to atomic energy?
Really, Inspector? I don't know what to say. Certainly, it's the first I've heard of it.
The first you've heard of it?
Of course, I must say, Inspector, I don't read the papers very much.
I wasn't suggesting that you'd have read it in the papers. I was wondering whether you'd had some first-hand knowledge.
What do you mean, Inspector?
Just this.
I want you to answer one or two questions for me. During the period you spent in Canada in connection with the Atomic Energy Commission, were you approached at any time or by any person to give information concerning your work?
Certainly not. And I think I should say, Inspector, that if the department of the War Office you represent is concerned with counter-espionage or anything of that nature, I'm not prepared to answer any of your questions.
But you do say that you were not approached and did not give any information whatsoever.
That is correct.
Inspector Burt sensed that despite his answers and his bold front, the little professor was rather worried. When the special branch finds that a suspect is worried, they usually proceed to worry him just a little more.
All right, Wilson. There are your instructions starting tomorrow. I want the men in Stafford Street and everybody who's covering Nunmay to change their technique. So far, their aim has been to be as unobtrusive as possible. From tomorrow, I want Dr. Nunmay to know that he's being watched.
And so the men of MI5, under the direction of Inspector Burt, began the next phase of the war they were conducting against the little professor. In the next few days, the shadowing was performed in a manner scarcely creditable to the reputation of Scotland Yard. Meantime, a message had been sent to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were instructed to inquire how closely Dr. May's travels had fitted into the pattern outlined for Alec in the cables which had been intercepted between Moscow and Ottawa.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police to Burt, Special Branch, Scotland Yard. Information supplied by Dr. John Douglas Cockcroft, Chief of the Atomic Energy Project at Montreal, shows Dr. May made several trips to the nuclear research laboratories of the Manhattan Project at Chicago, coinciding entirely with the reports from Alec. Dr. May left for England within a few days of his last trip to the research laboratories and is scheduled to return for a month's work next year. Everything checks up with the information in our possession concerning Alec.
Yes, and the signal goes on to say that no other scientist has followed the same schedule or is planning to return next year. Yes, everything fits. It must be Dr. Nunmay.
Meantime, officials of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation had entered the story. The information concerning Dr. May was sent to the headquarters of the Manhattan Engineer District in Washington, D.C.
One of the fundamental principles of United States military intelligence is that personnel on secret projects are entitled to know only as much as they require to carry on their work. Thus, months before, when the National Research Council of Canada had proposed that Dr. May be allowed to visit the United States for 1 month, the application had been placed before General Groves personally.
The general had sent for the file on Dr. May. It included the information that Dr. May had already visited the Chicago Atomic Research Laboratories 3 times, and that this third visit occurred between September 25 and October the 30th, 1944. He carried on extensive work in collaboration with other scientists in a highly secret and important new field. His work resulted in a research report in which he collaborated with an American scientist. To Groves, a 4th visit by May to the United States ran counter to security principles, for it would allow him to know too much of what was going on in widely separated projects. Accordingly, the answer had gone back, polite but firm, no. If vital secrets in the field of atomic energy still rest secure, credit must be given to General Groves' decision to bar Dr. May. For as the Canadian Royal Commission of Inquiry had stated,
The Soviets failed to obtain details on the structure of the atomic bomb only because there was no one in Canada who could tell them.
that all this was in the future. Back in London in September 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Burt had still to complete his case against Dr. Nunmay. After waiting for 1 more week, during which the professor must have been well aware that he was being shadowed by the Yard, the colonel went back to see the professor again.
So you see, Professor, I thought it would be a good idea if I came back to have another little talk with you.
Yes.
Yes. You see, I wanted to tell you that we know that you had an appointment to meet someone in the vicinity of the British Museum shortly after your return from Canada.
Well,
Who was that person? And why didn't you keep the appointment?
yes, you're quite right. I didn't keep the appointment.
And who was the person?
When I came back to London, I decided to wash my hands of the whole business.
What business?
The matter this person was going to see me about.
It's no use, Professor. You see, we know too much.
I tell you, I have nothing more to say.
I think you will have something more to say. And I am quite prepared to wait until you are ready to say it.
I absolutely refuse. If you think you can persuade me into making some sort of statement...
Inspector Bird didn't think. He knew. He realized that a man like Dr. Nunmay, conscious of the fact he was being followed, nervous and frightened, would in the end have to come clean. Well, Dr. Nunmay didn't tell the whole truth, but at least he started to tell part of the truth, and at the end of this interview, he gave a long statement.
About a year ago, whilst in Canada, I was contacted by an individual whose identity I declined to divulge. He called on me at my private apartment in Swale Avenue, Montreal. He apparently knew I was employed by the Montreal laboratory, and he sought information from me concerning atomic research. I gave and had given very careful consideration to correctness of making sure that development of atomic energy was not confined to the USA. I took the very painful decision that it was necessary to convey general information on atomic energy and make sure that it was taken seriously. For this reason, I decided to entertain a proposition made to me by the individual who called on me. After this preliminary meeting, I met the individual on several subsequent occasions in Canada. He made specific requests for information which were just nonsense to me.
What do you mean by that?
I could not understand what he was talking about.
Did he ask you for samples of uranium?
Yes, and for information generally on atomic energy.
And do you admit to giving him samples?
Yes. At one meeting, I gave the man microscopic amounts of U-233 and U-235, one of each. The U-235 was a slightly enriched sample and was in a small glass tube and consisted of about 1 milligram of oxide. The U-233 was about 1/10 of a milligram and was a very thin deposit on the platinum foil and was wrapped in a piece of paper.
What else did you give him?
I also gave him a written report on atomic research as known to me. This information was mostly of a character which has since been published or is about to be published.
Anything else?
The man also asked for information about the American electronically controlled ack shells.
And what did you do?
I knew very little about these and so could only give very little information.
Anything else?
He also asked to people employed in the laboratory, including a man named Veal, but I advised him against him.
And what did he give you?
He gave me some dollars.
How many?
I forget how many. In a whiskey bottle. I accepted these against my will.
I see. And when was your last contact?
Before I left Canada. It was arranged that on my return to London, I was to keep an appointment with somebody I did not know. I was given precise details as to making...
what were those details?
I forget them now.
Why didn't you keep the appointment?
Because I had decided that this clandestine procedure was no longer appropriate in view of the official release of information and the possibility of satisfactory international control of atomic energy.
I see. Is that the end of your statement?
Yes. The whole affair was extremely painful to me. I only embarked on it because I felt that this was a contribution I could make to the safety of mankind. I certainly did not do it for gain.
So much for the professor's statement. The special branch of Scotland Yard had already unearthed more incriminating evidence.
Here we are, sir. I've made a summary of these papers that have come in from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But they did it.
Thank you. Let's see. Dr. Nunmay, etc., etc., etc. Ardent communist. Yes, just what I expected. I see they picked up 8 of his friends in Canada. And do you see this, Wilson? Definite statements. The doctor visited other atomic projects at the request of the Soviet embassy. Well, I think our case is ready now. It's about time we brought in the Director of Public Prosecutions. Bring in all the other files on the case.
And so it happened that a few days later, while Dr. Nunmay was lecturing a class of students at King's College on the subject of nuclear theory, he had a visit from the special branch.
And that, I think, brings us almost to the end of our work today. We have, of course, only touched upon one phase of the subject of nuclear theory. And I hope that tomorrow afternoon I shall have the chance of dealing with chapters 7 and 8 in the papers under discussion, and that we managed to write a lot of ground. That will be all.
Excuse me, just one moment, please.
Yes, what is it?
You are Dr. Nunn-May.
Yes?
I have a warrant for your arrest. I must warn you.
Yes, I was expecting something like this.
If you just follow me.
And so Dr. Nunn-May was not able to continue his lecture the following day, for he had a pressing appointment at Bow Street, where the following morning he was formally charged with
having, for a purpose prejudicial to the safety and interests of the state, communicated to some persons unknown certain information calculated to be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy, contrary to the Official Secrets Act of 1911.
At the Old Bailey, Mr. Justice Oliver said,
I have listened with slight surprise to some of the things learned counsel has put before me. The picture of you as a man of honor who had only done what you believed to be right. I do not take that view at all. How any man in your position could have had the crass conceit, let alone the wickedness, to arrogate to himself the decision of a matter of this sort, where you yourself had given your written understanding not to do it, and knew it was one of the country's most precious secrets, when you yourself had drawn and were drawing pay for years to keep your bargain with your country. That you could have done this is a dreadful thing. I think that you acted not as an honorable man, but as a dishonorable man. I think that you acted with degradation. Whether money was the object of what you did, in fact, you did get money for what you did. It is a very bad case indeed. The sentence upon you is one of 10 years penal servitude.
Well, that isn't quite the end of the story, because after the trial, there were many protests that the sentence was out of all proportion to the magnitude of the offense committed. The Association of Scientific Workers issued a statement in which they declared,
We do not seek to justify Dr. May's breach of the Official Secrets Act, but we are convinced from our knowledge of Dr. May that his action was determined only by the principle that fundamental scientific data should have been shared with a country that was not only friendly, but a fighting ally. The only work in which Dr. May was engaged, and on which he could have been in a position to give unauthorized information, concerned fundamental scientific data relating to atomic energy. Dr. May had no connection whatever with problems of the construction of the atomic bomb and could not have been able to reveal information on atomic bomb manufacture.
What about that, does he? Oh, and by the way, I was going to ask you, why do you call this the case of the absent-minded professor?
Because, Clive, while the professor may have been intellectually minded about the secrets of atomic energy, you must remember he also gave away the secrets of electronic shells.
You've got something there, Percy. But you know what these absent-minded professors are? Which reminds me of a story.
Time's up, Clive.
Yes, I'm afraid it is. But I have to leave it until next week. Well, that's all for today. This is Clive Brooke saying goodbye and pleasant dreams.
Have you ever thought of murdering somebody? I have. I suppose most of us have. But there's something that's different between thinking about it and carrying it out. At least I hope so. Something that's different. But not something you can see or recognize or that may give you warnings. For example, a murderer may have stood next to you in the lift this morning. He might be the man who asked you for a light for his cigarette, or sat next to you in the cinema, or shared the same table at a restaurant, or... Anyway, there was nothing to show that he was a murderer. That is where truth differs from fiction. I've acted in a lot of films about murder, read many crime stories. There's always something strange about the man who commits the crime. Something remote, something sinister. As a background, that's sinister too. An implication of evil is always present. But in real life, the most hideous crimes cast no such shadows before them. The background could be quite cheerful and ordinary, the criminal a simple, prosaic sort of fellow. Now, let us take such a scene and such an ordinary sort of chap going into a post office one sunny morning in the little English town of Boston. And listen. Telegram, please, miss.
Thank you. Morning Post. Come immediately. 4:30 train, Waterloo, Bournemouth Central. Something will meet. I'm afraid I can't read this bit here.
Where? Let me see.
Here.
That's car. Car will meet.
Oh, yes. Yes, of course. Car will meet train. Extent no object urgent.
You've got it. How much will that be?
2 shillings, please.
Just a simple little act. Sending a telegram. The girl behind the counter thought nothing further about the man who sent it. Why should she? Would you? No reason why you should. Unless you happen to know, as I do, that he's a murderer. 2 days later, the body of a woman was found in a field about 3 miles outside Bournemouth, a seaside resort on the south coast of England. That is where our casebook history begins. The police are inspecting the body. Dear clothes, bed is still damp. Stopped raining early last night, didn't it? That's right. About 8:30. Must have happened before that, then. Nasty to work. Yeah, poor woman. Somebody made a thorough job of her, all right. Those car tracks show how she was brought here. The car must have pulled up just down the road there. I'd recognise those tire marks anywhere, Sid. Well, we better take measurements of the track and wheelbase, Fred. Not much more we can do till the doctor comes. We'll be along any minute now. It didn't take the police long to discover the identity of the murdered woman. She was Irene Wilkins of Streatham, London. And within a few hours, her widowed mother was then on her way to Bournemouth to see Superintendent Garrett in charge of the case.
Irene had been advertising in the paper for a position as lady cook. They answered by telegram, asking you to come down immediately.
Where was the telegram from, Mrs. Wilkins? Do you remember? This may be very important.
Oh, I remember where it came from, all right. It was from Boscombe.
Splendid.
Oh, I hope you'll get the brute that killed my poor girl.
We'll get him all right. You must be brave and help us all you can.
Oh, I'm sorry I gave way like that. But it does seem such a shame.
I wonder if you can remember the date on the telegram.
It came Monday morning. Now, that would be
December the 22nd. And this gives us something to work on. Sergeant Harris? Yes, sir? Come here, please. I want you to go to the post office at Boscombe. Yes, sir. Tell them I want to see the original telegram form that a customer handed in on the 22nd to be sent to this address. Wilkins, Thomere Road, Streatham. Very good, sir. Boscombe. We've heard that name before, haven't we? And Boscombe is only a couple of miles from Bournemouth. So it didn't take Detective Sergeant Ellis long to get there, nor did it take long for one of the post office clerks to search through the files and find the original copy of the telegram sent to Irene Wilkins. Sergeant Ellis made a quick trip back to Superintendent Garrett's office at Bournemouth. Start work, Ellis. Now, let's see what we can get from this telegram. Morning Post. That must be the newspaper Miss Wilkins advertised in. Come immediately, 4:30 train, Waterloo, Bournemouth Central. Something will meet. Oh, car. That's what it is. Car will meet train, expense no object, urgent. Signed Carver, Woolbeach House. No, I checked up the name and address, sir, and they're both fictitious. Well, that was to be expected. I'd say this was probably written by a man. You have anything peculiar about the spelling? I did, sir. It's almost as bad as the handwriting. That's pretty awful. Right. He is immediately spelled with an I instead of an E. No E in Bournemouth. And expense with a C instead of an S. This might give us something to work on. Well, the car did meet Irene Wilkins, sir. We've got the measurements. We know the make of tires it was fitted with. Yes, we may be able to do something with that in time. But I think our best line for the present is through this telegram. The handwriting and spelling are distinctive, sir. Put out a general inquiry, see if any more telegrams with peculiar spelling have been sent off lately. If so, get me the original. Try the Boston area first and work out from there. Very good, sir. When Scotland Yard takes over an investigation, no true is too small to be considered. Postal headquarters in London were asked to make inquiries throughout all their offices in the British Isles. It took a bit of time for Ellis to check all the branch post offices in the Bournemouth district, and it was some days later before he reported back to the superintendent, weary but triumphant. Come in. All right, you, Ellis. Any results?
Yes, sir. Not bad at all. 2 telegrams received during the last month with similar errors of spelling.
Good.
This is the first one, sir.
Addressed at Dickinson.
Yes, sir, the handwriting matches.
Odd name, this. And then from Hampstead this time. Advertisement. Immediate interview desired. Come Waterloo, Bournemouth. The main night of desire. Expenses given. Car will meet train. Signed Mrs. Cooper. Train spelling mistakes, aren't there? Immediate with an I instead of an E. Bournemouth without an E again. If with 2 F's and expenses spelled with a C. Definitely looks like the same chap.
I agree, sir.
What happened to Mrs. or Miss, whichever it is, Ditmanson?
No, the car didn't meet her, sir, so she went back to London.
Lucky for her, I think. When was this sent?
December the 17th. Here's the other one, sir, sent 2 days later on the 19th to a domestic employment agency.
Please send by 5:30 Waterloo to Boston train. Young, pleasant nurse companion for girl of 20. Car will meet train. There's another spelling mistake in this one. Pleasant with no A. In addition, all of them seem to have the same phrase. Car will meet. What do you think about it, Ellis?
Oh, well, sir, I think that both telegrams are decoys sent by the same person.
You contacted the employment agency, of course?
Yes, sir. They sent a letter to the address given, Butler, Boston Grange, asking for more particulars. They got no reply. So did nothing further in the matter.
Right. Well, it's back to the Boston post office for you, Ellis. You must be getting quite popular with the young ladies there.
No, sir.
What?
I'm not oversensitive, sir, but I get the feeling they think I'm a nuisance.
Well, now's your chance to change all that. Get talking to the clerks and see if you can find one who remembers accepting any of our illiterate friends' telegrams.
It's only a small post office, sir, just a man and a girl. The girl seems intelligent.
Fine. Off you go, and good hunting.
So Sergeant Elliot trotted back to the little post office at Buscombe, and his luck was in. He found Miss Watkins, the girl clerk, there alone. Ellis had not overstated the case. She was intelligent and not reluctant to talk. Quite the reverse.
I brought along a copy of a telegram, Miss Watson. One that was sent from this office. Would you mind looking at it and seeing if you remember it?
I'll try, but I don't promise I'll recognize it, mind you.
I understand that. Here it is. Take a look.
We have so many through here, you'd be surprised. They're talking of opening a bigger post office. We've really got more business than we can handle here.
Well, come to that, it might have been the other clerk that took this one.
Well, now, isn't that funny? After all the excuses I've been making, I do remember taking in this wire.
Splendid. Recollect anything about the sender?
Now, wait a minute. There was something. It was a man, I'm certain of that.
What did he look like?
I'm afraid I can't remember much about his looks, Sergeant Ellis, or what he was wearing. Still, there's something about that telegram nagging at the back of my mind.
Why, it'll come, don't worry. And take your time. That's what I find helps most when I'm trying to remember something. Try too hard, it just takes you that much longer.
But you say it's important.
Oh, it might be.
Let me read it again. Morning post. Come immediately. 4:30 train, Waterloo, Bournemouth Central. Terrible writing, isn't it?
Yes.
Something will meet. Oh, car will meet. That's it! Of course, I remember.
I knew you would.
His voice. I'd remember it anywhere. Now, I'll tell you why. There was that one word I couldn't read. That word, car. So I asked him what it was. And he said, car will meet. Now, I don't know why, but his voice gave me the creeps. It wasn't anything he said. I'm just sensitive to voices. I'd recognize that voice again anywhere.
It's going to be a bit of a job, finding a man by the sound of his voice. Still, you never know.
Well, I don't blame Ellis to you for thinking it was pretty much of a wild goose chase. But as he said, you never know. Meanwhile, other detectives were busy in the Bournemouth-Boscombe area, questioning both owners and chauffeurs of all cars whose general measurements might fit the tracks left at the scene of the crime. And here's where the name of Thomas Henry Alloway comes into our story. He was chauffeur to a Mr. Sutton, who owned a big grey saloon.
What were your movements, Mr. Alloway, during the late afternoon evening of December the 22nd last?
That was Monday. Being the old man's late night, I went down to the station about 5:30, picked him up, drove him back, and put the car away at 6 o'clock.
Do you have your own key to the garage?
No.
There's only one. Mr. Sutton keeps tight hold of it. I locked up, turned the key in like I always do. I see. Then I went into Bournemouth and had a bit of supper at the Duke's Arms and went to the cinema. After that, came home and went to bed. What else was there to do? Pubs were all closed for then.
You seem to remember it all very clearly, considering this happened over a month ago.
What's the matter? Is it a crime to have a good memory?
Have you got a good memory for spelling?
What do you mean, spelling? Yes. What are you getting at?
Well, did you ever have any difficulty with certain words?
I don't know.
Well, let's find out. Here, take this pencil and write in this notebook what I dictate.
At first,
The experiment was a flop. Alloway's handwriting turned out to be entirely different from that on the telegram. And what's more, his spelling was quite correct when it came to writing out sentences that used the misspelled words. No, it didn't look as though he could be the man Scotland Yard was after. More and more, Superintendent Garrett was coming to realize he had a really tough case on his hands.
You know, Elliot, we shouldn't have let the postal authorities talk us into publishing those telegrams in the newspapers.
Well, sir, it did seem a good idea at the time. It made it a lot easier for them to circularize the details of what we were after.
Yes, but it's probably tipped off our murder to change his handwriting and brush up on his spelling. He's clever, whoever he is.
Of course, there haven't been any more telegrams.
No. No. Judging from this report, it doesn't look as if Alloway's our man. Car's about the right size, but the tires don't match.
He says he hasn't changed them since he put them on himself 4 months ago.
What about the owner of the car, Mr. Stockton?
Well, the Chancellor, watertight alibi for the whole evening.
Ellis, my friend, I'm afraid for the moment we're stuck.
Yes, Scotland Yard was stuck. Just for a moment. Then coincidence took a hand, as it so often does in crime investigations. You'll hear about it in just a moment. Against any criminal getting away with it are enormous. Just think of all the details he has to take care of in planning out a crime. If just one goes wrong, he's likely to find himself in more than a spot of bother. He's got to think of himself and what he's doing first, last, and always. And he may overlook the fact that other people unimportant to him may notice things and remember them. Like Miss Watkins, the postal clerk, with her flair for remembering voices. One day, Thomas Alloway took a parcel into a Bournemouth post office. And it so happened that the clerk he handed it to was, yes, you're right, Miss Watkins, who had just been transferred there from the Boscombe branch.
I want to send this parcel. I'm in a hurry.
Let me have it. I'll wear it. I know that voice.
Easy. An old boyfriend?
No fear. Saturday 8 can take me.
8.5? I've got the exact change, I think. Half a tick. Yes, yes. Here you are. And don't punt that parcel around. If you bother to look at it, you'll see it's marked fragile.
That's the man who sent that telegram. Quick, come to the window. Yes, he's getting into a car. A grey one. Can you see the license number? LK, I can't quite see it.
LK 7405.
LK 7405. Look out for the counter. I must get on to the police at once. What a bit of luck meeting him. And it was him, too. I'd know that voice anywhere.
Yes? Oh, hello, Miss Watkins. Huh? Yes, of course I remember you. He has? You got the number. Excellent. LK7405. Good work. Thank you. Ellis, there's your friend Miss Watkins. She's recognized the man who sent the wire, and she's got the license number of his car. LK7405. Did it ring a bell?
Just a sec, sir. I'll look through these shelter interviews. No. Yes. That's Mr. Sutton's car. The chauffeur was Thomas Henry Alloway.
That fellow again. Well, we can't charge a man with murder because his voice resembles somebody who once sent a telegram.
There's not much support for his alibi, sir. Apart from the car being locked in the garage that night.
He could have had a duplicate key made.
I'm afraid all we can do for the moment is to keep a very close watch on that gentleman. If he is our man, perhaps he'll slip up somewhere.
No such luck. More time went by and nothing happened. And then, believe it or not, another coincidence. Remember, this is a true case. And I'm telling you, Joe, exactly as it took place. Another little fact popped up that Alloway hadn't accounted for, because he'd been concentrating on himself at the time. Superintendent Garrett received a call from a man named Humphreys.
Now, Mr. Humphreys, tell us your story in your own words.
Well, Superintendent, I traveled down to Boston on December the 22nd in the same train as Miss Wilkins.
Excuse me, you didn't know Miss Wilkins?
No, but I recognized her photograph later in the paper. Although by that time, there was nothing much I could do about it.
But I don't follow.
Well, I'll explain. I'd come to Boston to spend the night with friends just before a business trip I was taking abroad. Next day, early, I took the train to Southampton and went on board the boat. I probably wouldn't have seen the papers at all, except that we were late in sailing, and my cabin steward brought on board an early afternoon edition.
I see. That explains a lot.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I didn't see the paper until after dinner that night. And we'd been at sea several hours.
Right, go on.
Well, of course, I was horrified to read what had happened. She was a nice-looking girl. But there didn't seem to be anything I could do, so, well, I'm afraid I just left it at that.
Too bad. Still, I quite understand. Now, to come back to the day of the murder, you say in your letter that you saw Miss Wilkins get into a car.
Yes. When we got off our train and were having our tickets collected, I was standing right behind her. That's when I noticed her hat.
Mm-hmm.
I saw her into this car, and I noticed it particularly because it had a peculiar luggage rack, a design I hadn't seen before. That may seem odd to you, but I must explain that I'm a motor car body designer by profession.
So naturally a detail like that would catch your eye.
That's it. But I didn't notice the license number of the car. And it wasn't until the day before yesterday that I came back on a visit to Boston. And by a strange coincidence, yesterday I spotted that same car again, recognized it at once.
By the luggage rack?
Yes. The whole thing came back to me in a flash. And this time I took the number as the car was past me. My friends told me the case hadn't yet been cleared up, and so I immediately wrote to you.
That's very interesting indeed, Mr. Humphreys. I think this evidence may be of great value to us. Now, just one more thing. You see this pile of ladies' hats on the table? Can you identify any one of them?
Yes. This one. The girl I saw get into the car was wearing it.
That's the hat found beside the murdered body of Irene Wilkins.
Definite proof, you say? No, not yet. But the case against Thomas Alloway was building up. What about the handwriting on the telegram? Superintendent Garrett had a bright idea. He needed something written by Alloway before the time of the murder, and was able to obtain the application form Alloway had filled out for his chauffeur's driving license. Would they match? They did. Perfectly. Proving beyond a doubt that Alloway had disguised his handwriting during the police test. Somehow, we'll never know how, Alloway learned of this new development, and knowing that he'd been closely watched for weeks, it was too much. He cracked. He forged his boss's signature to 6 checks and bolted. Well, that did it. Alloway was off like a fox with a hound's outfit. The police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest and searched his flat. There they found a duplicate key to the garage. So he could have taken the car out again that fatal night without Mr. Sutton knowing. And Alloway? Where did he disappear to? How on earth do you find one person among 45 million? You and I couldn't do it on our own, but if we had a vast organization like Scotland Yard behind us, it would only be a matter of time before we found our man. And so Superintendent Garrett wasn't too surprised when he got a telephone call from the police at Reading. That's 90 miles away from Bournemouth.
Hello. Superintendent Garrett here.
We've got some good news for you, Superintendent. This is Reading Police Headquarters. We've picked up Thomas Alloway.
Oh, nice going. How'd you pick him up?
He came into a garage here, ready to job in the tank. We'll bring him along to you.
Sounds simple, doesn't it? But I'm sure you can imagine the many hours of patient work and the hundreds of inquiries that finally resulted in Alloway's arrest. On him, the police found cards and letters in his own handwriting that matched up nicely with the telegrams. As Superintendent Garrett put it, a distinctive, ugly scrawl as nasty as the man himself.
Looks now as though we've got an open and shut case of it. And there's just one thing more. Get a dozen of those chauffeurs we interviewed and Mr. Alloway. I want to see if Miss Watkins can pick him out of a crowd by his voice alone. Now, Miss Watkins, you're not nervous, are you?
Just a little. Now, don't mind me. I'll do whatever I can to help.
Good. Well, what I want you to do is very simple. In the next room are several men. When we go in there, they'll have their backs turned to you, and you turn nearest to them.
I can't see them then.
Yes, no, that's very important. They'll each in turn say certain words. If you recognize any of their voices, I want you to say so at once.
All right.
Ready?
Yes.
Now then, just stand here, facing the wall. All right, Everett. Carry on when you're ready.
Very good, sir. Will you read the words written on this card? Car will meet.
Second man?
Car will meet.
Third man?
Car will meet.
That's the man.
Thank you, Miss Watkins. That is Thomas Alloway.
Without any doubt, Thomas Alloway was a clever man in several ways. But like every other human being, he unfortunately had his weaknesses. If you set out to plan a crime, and I hope you don't do it very often, you should always make allowances for the unexpected. Alloway didn't. His complete disregard for anyone but himself brought about his downfall. When brought to trial, Alloway put up a bold defense in spite of the overwhelming weight of evidence produced by Scotland Yard. The vital and decisive moment came while Alloway was in the witness box being questioned by the counsel for the prosecution.
Now, Mr. Alloway, there are certain words I want you to spell, and I want you to be very careful.
All right, go ahead.
The first word is Bournemouth. Will you spell that, please?
Bournemouth.
Thank you. And now, expense. The word expense.
Expense.
Right. Next, immediate.
Immediate.
Now, would you spell pleasant?
Plesent.
Plesent, like you spell present.
Yes.
His memory had failed him. He'd forgotten to check over the spelling in the telegram to the employment agency asking for a pleasant young nurse. His error, coming when it did, was enough to tip the scales of justice against him. Thomas Henley Alloway was convicted and hanged. We've called this case Accurate Spelling is Essential. Of course, you say, if Alloway hadn't been a poor speller, he might have got away with murder. But there are more ifs in the story than that one. If Humphreys hadn't been a motor car body designer, he probably never would have noticed that luggage rack on Alloway's car and so wouldn't have remembered it. If he hadn't left on his business trip when he did, his evidence would have been available immediately after the murder. If the police hadn't been forced to concentrate on the only other evidence they had, the telegram sent by Alloway to his victim, they might never have discovered Miss Watkins, the postal clerk. If she hadn't had a special talent for remembering voices, she might never have noticed Alloway. I think you'll agree with me that the long arm of coincidence played a large part in this case. For if none of these things had happened as and when they did, the murderer of Irene Wilkins might never have been brought to justice. By the way, are you good at spelling? I'm not bad, but after listening to this case, I'm sure you'll agree that it's always wise to keep a dictionary handy. In the next case I shall be telling you about, coincidence plays no part at all. But that's the next time. Now, until we meet again, I must close this casebook of the secrets of Scotland Yard.
Presenting Clive Brooke in The Secrets of Scotland Yard.
How do you do? Is there such a thing as the perfect crime? If so, it's no place in this program. For we're concerned with the majority of crimes, the imperfect ones. And yet, every so often there comes a crime so very near to perfection that the criminals themselves must have believed at one stage of the game that they would really get away with it. And yet, invariably, they were wrong. Such is our case today, a classic in the annals of the tricksters. You've heard the expression safe as the Bank of England. For more than a century, that expression has signified the stability of a great British institution. Stability, yes, but invulnerable, I wonder. The title of this program is The Bank of England Robbery. Standing on an island site in the heart of the city of London is the home of the old lady of Threadneedle Street. For this is the affectionate name by which the Bank of England is known the world over. Her stone walls are guarded at night by a company of guardsmen, and her gold and good name are guarded by day by the vigil of the clerks and managers. This is as true today as it was equally true almost 100 years ago. The time is the year 1873. Strolling along a city street in the summer of that year are two men. One is an inspector from Scotland Yard. The other is the famous American detective Arthur Pinkerton, who was over in England at the time in connection with some investigations for one of his American clients.
Oh, a beautiful day, Inspector Shore.
Yes, Mr. Pinkerton, you've certainly brought the fine weather with you.
I guess it's just a fallacy in America, but we always believe you have nothing but rain and fog in England.
Well, I certainly wouldn't like to conceal anything from you, Mr. Pinkerton, and we do have our fair share of fog and rain, but all the same, I think...
What? Wait a minute.
Oh, what is it?
See those two fellows ahead of us?
What, you mean those two businessmen?
Yeah, and unless I'm very much mistaken, they're in a pretty queer business.
Oh, can't say I recognize them. Hey, look, they're crossing the road.
Come on, we'll keep on this side, but try to draw level.
No, they're strangers to me.
But not to me. Unless I'm very much mistaken, their names are George Bidwell and George MacDonald. Bidwell has been mixed up in crime all his life. MacDonald is a convicted forger. Both of them are well educated and will stop at nothing. I didn't know they were in England.
Well, thanks for the information. Oh, by the way, Pinkerton, do they specialize in any particular type of crime?
Yeah, robbing banks.
Detective Inspector Shaw arranged for the men to be shadowed. For the next few months, Scotland Yard kept a close watch on their movements. As an additional precaution, Scotland Yard sent a circular letter to the London banks, warning them of the presence of Bidwell and MacDonald in Europe. However, the majority of the banks had their own system of precaution, and the bank managers were not very impressed. Another of these circular letters from Scotland Yard. I don't know what they take us for. A bunch of fools, I suppose. A couple of American tricksters over here. I suppose they think they can get away with the sort of trickery they use in New York. Oh, I get as surprised as they tried over here. I'd like to see them try. His wish was to be fulfilled. The months went by, and no more news was heard of Bidwell and MacDonald. They both went over to the continent, and Scotland Yard gave up their watch. Then, a few months later, Scotland Yard received an urgent message from the Bank of England. Thank goodness you're here, Inspector. Immediately my attention was drawn to this forgery, I sent for you personally. I felt that if any man could help us, it'd be you.
Oh, very kind of you, Mr. May. Well, now, suppose you give me all the facts of the case.
Well, this morning, I had a message from Colonel Fraser, who is the manager of our West End branch. Among the bills cleared by him yesterday were 2 notes to the value of £1,000 each, in the name of a very respectable financier, Mr. Blydenstein.
You mean that these notes were signed by Mr. Blydenstein and were, in fact, promissory notes to the value of £1,000 each?
That is correct. Each notes such as these, provided they are genuine and signed by a reputable banker or financier, are accepted by the Bank of England as full security. In fact, just as if they were actual money.
And in due course, these bills go through to Mr. Blydenstein, who pays them, and the transaction is completed.
Yes, of course. Such bills are usually post-dated. In fact, that is the reason they're lodged with the bank. On the date stated, they would go to Mr. Blydenstein, who would pay up.
And these bills were, I presume, credited to the account of one of your customers at the West End branch?
Yes, the account of a Mr. Warren, a businessman of considerable interest. He's an American.
Oh, an American. You say he has considerable interest. Has he had the account of the bank for a long time?
Not a very long time. No, I've had a talk with Colonel Fraser, and I gather, in point of fact, he's only had Mr. Warren's account for about a year. But that, of course, is explained by Mr. Warren being an American. He's over here in connection with the construction of the new Pullman trains. He's having a number of these trains built in Birmingham for use in England and on the continent.
Oh, how did you know this?
He told Colonel Fraser.
I see.
Now, I should not want you to think that Colonel Fraser relied on Mr. Warren's word concerning his stability. During the past year, a considerable amount of business has gone through his account. I need hardly add that there's been no grounds for suspicion in connection with Mr. Warren's account. We've had bills against some of the most reputable bankers and financiers in Europe, including Rothschild. And in every case, the bills were genuine, because they've been met.
Yes, but this one against Mr.
Blydenstein.
Yes, this is a forgery.
That is correct. And the awful thing is that we might not have known it for some time if it hadn't been for the mistake.
Oh, what mistake?
Well, I told you, these bills were made out to be payable on a certain date.
Yes?
Well, on this particular bill, there was no date. It was noticed by one of the clerks, and Colonel Fraser sent it round to Mr. Blydenstein to have the correct date added. It was then we learnt it was a forgery.
When did Mr. Warren hand this bill into the bank?
He didn't actually hand it in. I understand that he's been away in Birmingham for the last few months, and he had been in the habit of sending bills by registered post.
Sending bills? Oh, in fact, you mean that he's made a habit of this sending bills?
Yes.
And what's the state of his account?
Well, there's about £5,000 in it. A very considerable amount of money has passed through the account in the past few months, and most of it has been withdrawn through cheques made payable to a Mr. Horton, who has an account at the Continental Bank in London.
Mm-hmm. And what money has been paid into Mr. Warren's account to meet these cheques?
Not much money. Most of it is represented by bills which will fall due during the next few months.
Oh. And in the meantime, the Bank of England has credited Mr. Warren. About how much money do these bills represent?
Well, I've only glanced at the figures, but I should estimate it must be something in the neighborhood of £100,000. £100,000. Mr. Warren didn't do things by halves. Immediately, Scotland Yard acted. Obviously, the account at the Continental Bank, in the name of Horton, was the means whereby the criminals were extracting the money. On the very day while Mr. May and the inspector were visiting the Continental Bank, a young man came in to cash one of Mr. Warren's checks.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I've come to cash this check.
Oh, thank you. If you'll just wait 1 moment, will you, sir?
Yes, that's the account.
All right, Mr. May.
Just 1 moment, please.
Yes? Anything the matter?
I'm a police officer. If you'd accompany me to the manager's office, I'd like a word with you. The young man, whose name was Noyes, turned out to be the clerk to Mr. Horton. He denied all knowledge of the plot and said that he'd only been in Mr. Horton's employment for a matter of months.
We've checked up at the lodging house where he's staying, and I gather that he talks quite freely of his post with Mr. Horton.
When did he meet Horton?
Evidently, he put an advertisement in the newspaper saying that he was seeking a situation and could put up some money as a guarantee of his being trustworthy. He gave Horton £150 to keep in trust. Needless to say, Horton has disappeared. All the same, I don't quite trust Mr. Noyes. I think he knows more than he's saying.
Further inquiries revealed that Noyes had come from America and that he'd arrived only 6 months ago. Pinkerton, the American detective, was now back in New York and acting on behalf of the bank. He helped Scotland Yard with information they urgently needed. Pinkerton advised London that a relative of Noyes had received that same month a draft for £1,000. For a junior clerk, Mr. Noyes was very well paid.
It's no use, you know. You'd better tell us the truth. Where did you get this £1,000?
What £1,000?
Did Horton give it to you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Where is Horton? I warned you before, you'd do well to tell all you know.
But the gang had chosen well. They knew that Noyes would keep his mouth shut. Already, however, the gigantic proportions of the crime had aroused the indignation of the country. It transpired that every one of the bills held by the Bank of England were forged. All the genuine bills that had been passed through the account of Mr. Warren during the previous year had been used by the gang both to create confidence in Mr. Warren's stability and to act as a basis for the forgeries they were planning to carry out. The Bank of England, to use an American expression of a different generation, had been taken for a ride. Needless to say, Horton, Warren, and every trace of the money had completely disappeared. The hunt was on. It needed no great feat of detection on the part of Scotland Yard and Pinkerton to identify Horton and Warren as George Bidwell and George MacDonald. The only pity was their previous warning to the London banks was not taken a little more seriously.
We know for certain that MacDonald left England before the very first forged bill was lodged at the bank. He was taking no risk. He went to France, and so far we haven't picked up his trail. But we've reason to suspect, however, that he's headed for South America.
But what about the money?
That isn't going to be easy to trace. After Noyes cashed the check at the Continental Bank, he took the banknotes to the Bank of England and exchanged them for gold sovereigns.
Surely we can find this hoard of gold?
Hold on a minute. I believe they changed the gold back into notes, back into gold sovereigns, and then into American bonds. One can't help admiring their foreignness.
I really cannot share your admiration.
No, Mr. May, I don't suppose you can. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that if MacDonald has got away, Bidwell is still in this country. We're having every port watched, and we're putting our own Scotland Yard men to keep an eye on the American boats. I don't think he'll get away.
George Bidwell was a man of infinite resource. He actually followed Noyes on his visit to the bank on that ill-fated day. And he'd seen him come out, accompanied by a police officer, and immediately realized that the game was up. To endeavor to get out of England in any ordinary way was out of the question. Although Bidwell was only some 40 years old, he'd spent the greater part of his life dodging the police of various countries. Having destroyed all the evidence at his lodgings, he made his way to one of London's great railway stations. He took the precaution of having a porter buy his ticket to Dublin, and then, to quote his own words,
I intended taking the 9 p.m. mail train, and as a precaution, I waited until the last moment, after the passengers were on board and the waiting room doors shut. As the mail was being transferred from the wagons to the train, I took the opportunity to walk through the big gate unobserved amid the rush and confusion. The car doors were all locked, but on showing my ticket to a guard, he let me into a compartment, no doubt supposing that I had obtained admission to the station from the waiting room and had been loitering about. The same was probably the case with the 2 or 3 other men looking out of the waiting room window at the platform, whom I judged to be detectives. The train rolled out of the station, and soon I was leaving London behind at the rate of 50 miles an hour. After midnight, we took the steamer to Holyhead and arrived at Dublin about 7 a.m. I should not have felt so comfortable throughout this night's journey had I known that the telegraph was flashing in all directions.
£500 reward for the capture of George Bidwell, who is supposed to be one of the persons engaged in the great bank forgery. He is an American citizen, about 40 years of age, of dark complexion, and is alleged to be in Ireland.
Bidwell went on to Cork, and as he left the station, was followed by 2 detectives. One of them inquired whether he'd ever been there before. With a haughty yes, he walked slowly away. He made his way to a wharf where a tender was waiting to convey passengers and mail to the liner SS Atlantic.
On entering, I found the place crowded and the tugboat ready to convey the passengers to the steamer Atlantic. Before attempting to step aboard the tug, I took a look around and saw my 2 detectives standing back in one corner with their eyes fixed on me, all but their heads being concealed behind the crowd, waiting to see their friends off for America. Apparently unconscious of their presence, I threw my papers one by one down among the passengers, and as the deck of the boat was 8 or 10 feet below, the detectives could not see to whom they were being thrown. I stood leaning on the rail for a short time, gazing at the scene, then left the wharf, not even glancing in the direction of the detectives. I felt that any attempt of mine to embark would precipitate their movements. Therefore, I at once abandoned all ideas of taking passage for Queenstown.
Bidwell was luckier than he realized at the time. On that trip, the Atlantic struck a rock off the coast of Nova Scotia, and of 1,002 people aboard, 560 lost their lives. All the rest of the evening, George Bidwell spent in trying to shake off the detectives who were shadowing him. Quite likely, these men were only acting on a general suspicion and did not care to take any definite action till they were made more sure that he was the wanted man. He stayed that night at a commercial hotel. When he went to the post office, where he'd arranged to collect mail in the name of Bodle, he realized that he was being watched. He hired a jaunting car and set off to the country.
Sure, you're a nervous man, sir.
Nervous? Why should I be nervous?
And why should you tell me in any case? You need not be frightened of me, sir. There's many a true patriot in Ireland that's nervous these days. I know you're a patriot, sir, and there are many doing what you're doing.
How do you know I am?
Trust in me. There are many in Ireland who will protect you.
When they reached a small town, Bidwell dismissed the jaunting car and decided to stay the night at an hotel. Glancing at a recent paper in the sitting room, he learned for the first time that his real name was known to the police, and that he was suspected to be in Ireland.
I sat in a hotel, utterly dumbfounded, bewildered, paralyzed. I'd experienced some shocks, some takedowns in my time, but never one to compare with this. Arousing myself from a state of mental stupefaction, hitherto unknown, I put the paper into the fire and retired to the room allotted to me.
But in the morning, he was off on the road again, posing as a Fenian, an Irish revolutionary. He managed to make his way to Dublin. He put up at a small hotel and might well have escaped detention if he hadn't left behind him his scarf with the initials GB. This was seen by one of the maids.
I found this in his room, sir. He must have left it out when he was packing.
Ah, this is our man, all right. I want every man you can spare to watch all the trains from Dublin tonight.
Very good, sir.
He must not get away. He must not get away.
But he did, to Belfast, where, pretending to be a Frenchman, he managed to get on a boat to Glasgow. From there he went on to Edinburgh, where he posed as a German medical student. For over 3 months he lived there, corresponding with friends in America and successfully concealing his identity. Every day he went for a brief stroll to buy the latest Edinburgh and London papers. The newsagent, not entirely taken in by Bidwell's disguise, felt there was something suspicious about his customer. He happened to mention it to another customer who worked for a firm of lawyers. And among the clients of this firm of lawyers was the Bank of England. By such a slender chain of circumstances and luck, information concerning this mysterious stranger came back to Scotland Yard. Bidwell was followed. He took flight, tried to get away. This time he did not succeed.
I tell you I'm no Fenian.
I know that.
And what do you want me for?
For forgery.
I don't know what you mean.
I think you do.
Meantime, the arrest of the other principal in the conspiracy was no less tinged with melodrama. There was a worldwide hue and cry. In America, Pinkerton was leading exhaustive inquirers into the background of the gang. A trail, in the end, led to Cuba, where other members of the gang were found and arrested. As for MacDonald, he fled aboard the liner Thuringia, and his arrest was only achieved after a melodramatic boat race in the New York harbor. And what of the loot?
Among the few clues which had not been destroyed by MacDonald and Bidwell was a letter which mentioned a certain Major Matthews. With his name as our guide, we went through the shipping records of every mailboat company. And at last we found trace of a trunk of clothing which had been sent to the depot of the North Atlantic Express Company in New York to be called for by Major Matthews. Wrapped up in the soiled linen were found 3 bundles of bonds to the total value of almost $300,000.
And if those of you who are inclined to think that the modern criminals know more tricks than their predecessors, remember this amazing story occurred in 1873. When the various accused came to trial in August of that year, there was such a vast array of evidence against them that there was little to be said in their defense. It says much for their characters that they were principally concerned in seeing that the innocent did not suffer for their actions. Bidwell spoke of the manager of the West End branch of the Bank of England.
I should like to say concerning Colonel Fraser that I hope as the years go by his resentment against me will wear away. I know that a lot of people have blamed him. But I should like to say that any other man in London, however able, had he been in Colonel Fraser's position, would have been deceived by us. I'd like to say how sorry I am that he was deceived. That is all I have to say.
The commercial world was horrified by the revelation that the greatest bank in England could be tricked, deceived, and despoiled. In those days of harsh sentences, the criminals could have little hope of mercy. On the 8th day of the trial, after the men had been found guilty, the Lord Chief Justice proclaimed sentence.
You, who now ask for mercy, and who are not restrained by respect for law and honesty, must be met with a terrible retribution. And it should be well known that persons who commit crime, which only persons of education sometimes commit, will be sure to meet with a very heavy punishment. I cannot see a reason to make a distinction in the sentence I am about to pass. In regard to that sentence, if I could conceive any case of forgery worse than this, I should have endeavored to take into consideration whether such punishment less than the maximum might have been sufficient. But as I cannot conceive a worse case, I see no reason for mitigating the sentence. That sentence is that each and all of you be kept in penal servitude for life. And in addition to that sentence, I order that each one of you shall pay 1/4 of the costs of the prosecution.
"20 years were passed by before the last of these criminals was released. Bidwell lived to write the story of his infamous crime. As for the rest, there's the rest. Have you noticed one thing about this story? At each stage, the almost perfect crime was spoilt not by the vigilance of the bank or the law, but by those little errors which, as we've learned in the series, time after time give the criminals away. If Bidwell had been a little less greedy, he might have escaped. Remember, those 2 bills which led to their downfall were not detected because they were forged, but because he'd forgotten to fill in the date. Again, after all Bidwell's ingenuity to avoid arrest, he put the police on his trail in Dublin by forgetting to pack his scarf. The Bank of England robbery was called the crime of the century, but like most other crimes, it was far from being perfect. Well, that's all for now. At our next meeting, I hope to be able to tell you more of the secrets of Scotland Yard.
This is Clive Brooke. And what a strange paradox it is, isn't it, Percy? That while the terrible fact of war itself invariably brings out the best in men, the blessing of the peace that follows it so often reveals the worst.
It is a paradox, Clive, and a tragic one. And I don't suppose that any war in history has left behind such a scum of crime, big and little as the last one. And London was perhaps of all cities the most affected. Into London during the war years there poured men of all nations. But unfortunately, not all of these were men of goodwill. Hundreds of thousands returned to their homes, but some remained.
And our story concerns a small group of these. It is set in the London of 1945, a London still dazed by the fact of peace, a London relieved from the threat of bombing, but beset with shortages, a London which was giving asylum to many strange gentry who were thriving and growing fat on an increasing black market. Strange snatches of dialogue could be heard in the back streets of Soho, in the shady cafes and night dives, where hundreds of deserters from all nations mixed in with the existing criminal population of the great city.
Henry here, Joe?
On a table in the back room. Go right through. You with him, soldier?
Yes, I'm with him.
Go ahead, then.
Say, what is this? Who's this Polish guy? Is he on the level?
Go on in, soldier. I mind my business, and you see after yours.
Cameras is all very well. The watches is all very well. Occupation marks is all very well.
And Wilbur pistols is all very well. Now, soldier, what else you can get, huh?
Yeah, say, what kind of a racket is this? I just brought across these couple of cameras. The German guy traded them in for 4 packets of fags. I ain't got nothing else.
Now, listen, soldier. Cameras is for little people, eh? 30 pounds, 35 pounds. Finish. What about jewels, huh?
There's plenty of jewels where you're coming from, yes? Plenty of jewels where you go back to, yes?
Here, bloke's trying to make a crook out of me. I tell you, I got the cameras straight, see?
Now, listen, soldier. You help us, we help you. You are stationed near Hamburg. Good. Now, you go and see this man's. Here is the address. Take the packet to you, and the first friend of yours who is for coming to London for leave, he bring us the packet, no?
I don't like it.
But you will like the 50 pounds, $200, Swiss francs, whatever you are wanting. Your friend hand back to you, no?
Yeah, who are you blokes, anyway?
I am Henrik. He is Marion. That is enough for you.
Henrik, Marion. Deserters from the Polish army. Men on the run. Men without identity cards, ration books, passports. Men now without a country. Men who could move about only by night. Members of the shadow army that manipulated London's black market. Men who carried no papers, but who carried... Yes, quite so. The gunfire of war was over, but other guns spat in the London nights. And as dawn broke over London River one October morning in 1945, 2 policemen were patrolling Lambeth Bridge when...
Well, I'll be.
What's that? What are you looking at, Tom?
Look through there. Here, in the pump house down there.
Can't see very well through this little hole. It's a man. Dead by the look of it, what's more.
He's a man, all right. How the devil they get him in there? The hole's not more than a foot wide.
Door's locked. Listen, you get along to the fire service people and get the key, and I'll stay here.
It was a dead man. A murdered man. A man who was soon identified as taxi driver Frank Everett. His cab was found abandoned in Notting Hill Gate, 3.5 miles away from the body, which had been thrust into the tiny brick edifice in the middle of the busy bridge. Who had done this deed? Why?
Clearly shot in the back of the neck, Inspector. Probably at the side of the driving wheel. Death almost instantaneous. Probably took place at about 2 this morning. Anything known about the fellow?
Seems to have been a good chap. Ex-guardsman, been a policeman. Known to his pals as the Duke. Motive, I'd say robbery.
Anything to go on?
The bullet, 32 caliber, and this.
What is it? Cap or something?
We found it on the floor of the cab, top of a propelling pencil.
Find the other half of that, and you've got your man.
Come, Doc, not so fast. Plenty of people use cabs. There's no reason to assume that this belonged to the last person to use this one. And it'd be hard enough to find him, even if it were so. No, Doc, there's not a lot to go on.
This was the kind of thing that was causing Scotland Yard its biggest headache ever. A resident native criminal population is one thing, but a floating reinforcement of unknown aliens is quite another. Who had killed taxi driver Everett?
Might be, well, anyone. Cab itself's a mess of fingerprints, naturally enough. None of them on our records. Everett seemed to have no particular enemies. Seems a straightforward shoot and snatch.
And for what? Hey, Inspector?
Just a few pounds, as much as the poor chap could have had at the end of his day's work. Murder for just a little cash in hand. And it makes you think. Well, there's not much more we can do here, Doc. Better get back to the yard.
Right up. Black market, when gold, read all about it. Black market, when gold, right up.
Pick up the van corner of George and Melville Street, Lou, and take the stuff right over to Joe's place. Whiskey mostly, but 100 cases of gin as well.
Now listen, Tom. There's a chap I know can fix everything for you. You want the dollars? He's got them.
Of course, they'll cost you double the odds, but the point is they're there.
Watches, Mr. Mason? Well, of course you shall have watches. They're good ones, Swiss ones. Meet me here Friday, same time, I'll have them. Oh, and by the way, bring cash. You understand. Checks? We don't want them.
But sometimes, and it's the oldest inevitability of the underworld, thieves fall out. In the small hours of the morning, not a fortnight after taxi driver Everett had been found, huddled in the Lambeth Bridge pumping house, a policeman patrolling the Notting Hill Gate area of London noticed a small saloon car standing rather out from the curb.
Queer place to leave a car. Excuse me, sir. 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 Come on there now. Wake up, wake up. Blood? He's dead.
Chief Inspector Somerset speaking. Who? Oh, yes, Sergeant. Good morning to you. The devil you have. We'll be right down. Oh, you're right, Sergeant. This certainly is a job for the murder squad. Goodbye. Sergeant. Sir, ask Inspector Byrne to step this way, will you? And get me the Home Office on the telephone. I want to speak to Dr. Kerr.
Very good, sir. Right away, sir.
Annie? Notting Hill Gate again. Home Office, Somerset speaking. Oh, is that you, Doctor? Can I pick you up in a quarter of an hour's time? A fellow found shot in a car. Yes. Notting Hill Gate area. Right, we'll call for you. Goodbye.
Down at the scene of the crime, Detective Inspector Somerset, Dr. Donald Tier, Home Office pathologist, and members of the murder squad got busy. The doctor gave his verdict briefly.
Not in the back of the neck, Inspector. Bullet just missed a vital brain center, so he probably took quite a while to die, poor devil.
What have you got there? The bullet, Doctor. 32 caliber. Bedded in the roof of the car. Clearly shot in the front seat, then dumped in the back. Pockets have been rifled, so it looks like a robbery. The chap who did it's been good enough to leave his fingerprints and blood on the windscreen. Oh, yes, Sergeant, what is it?
We checked the car number, sir, and found that it belongs to a foreigner, sir. Morozov's the name. Reuben Morozov.
Well, I'll be hanged. So that's who it is. Russian Robert himself.
Who's he, Inspector?
A nasty piece of work, Doctor. There's not a country in Europe that hasn't chucked him out. And he's been operating here since just before the war. Stolen jewelry, gaming houses, currency deals.
So it's good riddance, eh?
It is damn good riddance. But unfortunately, it's something else, too.
What's that?
Murder.
Inspector Byrne speaking.
Byrne, good. I want you to stand by for a big roundup, starting tonight. I'll want every available man and woman on the job.
Right. What's the object?
Russian Robert's been shot.
The devil he has.
I'd say it was one of his pals, or maybe more. We've got to find him.
Right. When do I expect you?
After lunch. I've just got one inquiry to make, then we'll get going. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Yes?
This is Mr. Marty Ross's friend.
Well, what about it? He's out. I don't know when he'll be back.
He won't be back, madam. He's dead.
I don't know where he went. I don't know who he was going to meet. I tell you, I don't know.
Try and think again, madam. You told me he was here during the evening.
Yes, that's right. Just, well, sort of here. Not doing anything special. Then he was getting ready to go to bed when the phone rings.
Well, go on. What time was that?
It'd be about 11 o'clock. He didn't say much into the phone. Just yes and no and things like that. Then he hangs up the receiver and comes in with his hat on.
Seemed in a hurry, eh?
Well, yes, he did. He just said, so long, and went up.
Is that all he said? Come now, madam, I want the truth of this. Did he say where he was going?
Well, he did. He said, I've got to meet some people down by the Edgware Road Underground Station. That's all.
And you wouldn't know who?
No. Oh, I wouldn't. Friends, I suppose.
Which friends?
I tell you, I don't know. I've a lot of friends.
He has a lot of queer friends.
Madam, you're right, he has. Good day to you.
KGO with...
An international criminal, chief of a thriving London black market gang, is dead in his car, shot through the neck. And all the resources of Scotland Yard are mobilized for one of the most all-embracing underworld probes ever conducted. Dozens of detectives, men and women, took on strange roles, posing as currency evaders, speculators in black market liquor, indeed as every type of stooge upon which Russian Robert and his colleagues flourished. They descended upon the night spots, shady hotels, and drinking clubs. Chief Inspector Somerset himself played a leading role.
Well, what about another? Good stuff, eh? The real Mackay, this. Yes, there is never short. Oh, same again, then? Two the special scotch, please, Harry.
Here you go, sir.
So you don't think you can help me? It's not easy, pal. It's not easy. Dollars, they're tight, pal. Tighter than they've ever been. But our mutual friend told me that. Well, cheers. Your good health. Yes, he might have told you. And a week ago he'd have been right. I could have got him. But, now look, I'll tell you something. You read about that fellow that got choked the other day? Plugged in his car? Oh, yes, he was Pole, wasn't he? Or Russian or something? Real name was Matty Rossov. Russian Robert, they called him. Well, that's where the dollars would have come from. A week ago. See? Oh, just my luck. But surely hadn't he a pal or something? He plenty. Look, I'll tell you something. And maybe it'll help you. Trouble is, I don't know him myself. Not like I knew Robert. I'd be very grateful. Harry, 2 more scotches. There's a fellow dressed up as a Polish naval officer who was in on dollars with Robert. There's him, and there's another. Mm-hmm. Go on, this may mean a lot to me. This other fellow's a Pole, too, but he's a silly. I met him with Robert once. Name of Marion. What, do you mean that's his surname? That's all we ever called him. Marion. Just Marion. But where can I find these fellows? Yeah, that's where you've got me, pal. Might be here. Oh, I haven't seen him since Robert got croaked. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll try and find out. See? Oh, thanks. Well, I'm looking again in a day or two. You always here? Over to this time.
This much the man from Scotland Yard learned. And then, this. Please go on, madam. You're being most helpful.
Well, Inspector, if I lay my hands on them...
Yes, I'm sure. I want you to help us do just that.
Well, what happened was this. A man friend and I were in the Pelican Club about 3 weeks ago, it was. And there were these 3 at the bar. One was a naval officer, the other just, quite an ordinary-looking fellow, though he spoke with an accent, and the girl. We got into conversation with them.
No, please, you smoke one of mine.
I don't know if I should. Oh, thanks.
Will you, madame?
You go on, miss. When my friend is becoming generous, it's the time to strike. Look out, he might offer you a drink yet.
And it is his turn, Henry. Oh, look, let me give you a light, if it works.
A woman with a light that works. Oh, what wonder.
I'm afraid mine never works. Oh, what a beautiful bag. It is rather a pet, isn't it? I'm terribly thrilled with it. May I look? Oh, it's lovely, isn't it, Ken?
Yes, certainly is.
I haven't seen anything like that since before the war. American, I suppose. You guess again. Paris, then? No, not Paris either. It certainly didn't come from this country. Shall I tell her, Marion?
I shall be flattered, my dear.
The genius who made me this bag isn't a yard away.
Great Scott, you don't mean to tell me who made it, sir?
Please, I confess, yes, I made it. I'm glad you approve.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I suppose...
Now then, Linda, now then.
Oh, but darling, it's so lovely.
could you? Well, I do make them, madame, but I am very busy. Showing the orders.
But, Marion, there's Mrs. Fortescue. You've just finished. Remember, she cancelled the order, and it's exactly like mine.
Oh, yes, that is true, yes.
Well, might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb.
Oh, can you, darling?
Well, I don't know about that. Well, could you let me have the bags? And as a matter of interest...
I'm afraid they're not cheap, sir.
I scarcely expected they would be.
The price of the bag is £45, sir. I would not ask you to pay that now, naturally. But if perhaps you give me a deposit, I'll complete the bag, say in 2 days, and mail it to madame. Then you can pay me the balance if you are satisfied.
Seems fair enough.
Good. Shall we say £25 down then, and the balance on Thursday when madame receives the bag?
It's an awful lot, darling.
No nonsense. Our back's a winner today. Right you are then. I'm most grateful to her.
No, not at all. Then if I could have madame's address, I will see that she has the bag.
And that was the last we heard, Inspector, except I was angry, Inspector, so angry that I went almost mad. I went back to the Pelican, and I bulleted an address out of the barman. I went there, Lansdowne Road, Maida Vale.
Go on, what happened?
I can't tell you. I wanted to get it. It was horrible, horrible. There was a Spaniard who made the bags. They're not men, Inspector. They're monsters, beasts. I ran, and here I am.
Well, perhaps you'll come with me in a police car and point out the house.
Yes, of course, Inspector.
But the house, a 6th-floor boarding establishment, was completely empty. The birds had flown. Chief Inspector Somerset was relentless.
I want a dozen of our women, Baron, and this is what I want them to do. Each takes an area. Each poses as a victim of this damned handbag trick, looking for the tricksters. We may get somewhere in that way. A hint is nothing more.
Woman Detective Shirley Jennings, probing the Maida Vale area, got more than a hint.
There's too much of that sort of thing going on by a long chalk.
Then you do know something.
Well, once I do, and once I don't. But if I was you, I'd ask again 3 doors up.
It was Chief Inspector Somerset, with his murder squad posted at all approaches to the house, who called 3 doors up.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm sure, sir, but that's all the rooms I've got vacant just at the moment.
Oh, pity. I do like to be on an upper floor. Is there no chance of a vacancy upstairs?
Oh, don't know, sir. Gents comes and gents goes. Spanish gentleman on the 3rd floor front, well, he hasn't been here long. He might go, or he might not.
Spanish gentleman, eh? Well, I wonder, could I see the room?
Yeah, that I'm afraid you can't, sir. He always locks up when he goes out.
Come on.
Oh, my goodness me, sir, what's going on outside?
What, where?
Well, them 2 men, sir. What have caught hold of that naval gentleman?
Looks as though the police are arresting him.
Why, whatever can the matter be? Oh, my goodness, they put him in that car.
Oh, well.
Oh, there you are, sir.
So you've got him, eh?
Great not, sir. This chap's a Polish deserter, but he's not our man.
One Polish deserter's as likely as not to know the next. You, what's your name? Hirokov. What do you know of a man called Marion?
Marion? Marion? Why? I'm not going to meet this man, Marion. Yes, look, I am give this address and told he will be there this evening.
Sergeant, take this man back to the yard and hold him there. You and I will go to meet Marion.
And in a squalid cafe in London's East India Dock Road, the men from Scotland Yard met the man called Marion.
Who you are? I not know you, any of you. This is wicked, wicked.
You come along with us, my lad. You can do all your talking back at the yard.
I protest.
Yes, I've no doubt you do. Come on, get moving.
Neat. A very neat pickup. And one which exceeded even Chief Inspector Somerset's highest expectations. For at Scotland Yard, when Marion Godofsky's possessions were laid out upon the table...
And I suppose you now got this, and this, and this.
They were given by a friend.
This cigarette lighter, Gundowski, and this watch and this wallet belong to a man called Matarosov. Russian Robert, I think you called him. And I suppose you've never heard of Henryk Malinowski.
I have heard of him.
Well, I hope you will soon have the pleasure of meeting him.
Inside Matarosov's wallet, Somerset found the name of Malinowski and an address in the North London suburb of Ilford. Malinowski was in civilian clothes, but the uniform of a Polish naval officer was discovered in a wardrobe. In its pockets were a signet ring and other jewelry that had belonged to the murdered Russian Robert. These 2 charming Polish gentlemen who had worked so long together were not exactly loyal when it came to the showdown, and they saw that it was...
All right, Kondowski, my lad. All right, take your time.
After we meet Robert that night, we go to a cafe and discuss things to do. Then we go to the car, and Malinovsky is always for wanting to shoot people and robbing them. Malinovsky, he said to me, I am going to finish with him. We are pushing the car for to start it, and I tell Malinovsky not to be a fool. Then he's starting the engine, I sit in front with Robert. Then I hear a shot, and I get like bells in my ears. I get out. Malinovsky come after me, and he said, come back or I shoot you. I went back with him and helped to put Robert in the back seat. We went to Malinovsky's room and divided the money.
And that's all?
Yes, that is all.
Was that the truth? Or this?
It was I who sat beside Robert. Marion is in the back. I hear a shot and Robert's head falls forward. Marion said, we must camouflage it, and asked me to move Robert. I said I could not do it. Marion pulled down the seat alongside of Robert and dragged him into the back car. When he counted the money, there was about 160 pounds. Marion gave me 80.
Yes, a charming pair of gentlemen, neither of whose statements was enough to save him from the gallows a week or two later. Of course, there were certain matters of fact that made the guilt of at least one of them positive, as Percy Hoskins will tell you.
In the first place, the bloodstained fingerprints on the windscreen of Russian Robert's car were found to be those of Marion Grondowski. In the second place, a .32 automatic pistol picked up at his address proved to be the one that fired the fatal bullet. Oh, and there was another thing. Something else was found among Grondowski's effects.
I thought this might be of some interest to you.
Self-propelling pencil, eh? Aha, and minus a top. Sergeant, have you the exhibits in the taxi driver murder?
Here, sir. This is the pencil top we found.
A perfect fit. And look, the little fracture in the groove settles it. Well, Sergeant, I think we can stop work on that case. Pity we can't hang the same scoundrel twice.
We can hang two of them once, sir, and they've got a potential third out of our way.
Yes, when thieves fall out. You know, I often wonder what makes men take such chances. Of these three rascals, two had proved themselves damned soldiers. The third, Russian Robert, was a crook through and through and always had been. There's an irony about the whole case, isn't there?
Yes, indeed, Clive. And perhaps the most significant thing of all is that it took the anger of a woman who had been cheated to round the matter off.
And that brings us to the end of the black market murders, or the case of Russian Robert.
So how do you do? This is Clive Brooks. November the 2nd, 1917, Regent Square, Bloomsbury, London. A street scavenger known to his friends as Jack the Sweeper, no relation to Jack the Ripper, is going about his usual business of sweeping up the leaves and debris of a London square when he comes across a parcel wrapped in sacking just inside the railings of the garden.
Hello, what's this? Somebody left some old clothes here or something, eh? Let's have a look. What is all? Just...
Yes, of course, you are right. Not just a body, part of a body. Headless, legless, and handless. The body, or its remains, was covered with delicate underclothing of lace and blue ribbon and was wrapped in a sheet. There was also a torn piece of brown paper on which had been scrawled BLODIE BELGIUM. Bloody Belgium.
Have you found anything else, Sergeant? Yes, sir. A search was made in the vicinity immediately after the discovery. A little distance away, in another part of the garden, we found the legs of the victim wrapped in paper. Dr. Stillsbury is taking a look at those now.
Good. If there's one man in London who may help us, it's Dr. Bernard Stillsbury. Even in those days, the name of young Dr. Bernard Stillsbury had earned the respect and admiration of Scotland Yard. Stillsbury, a hard-working pathologist, had devoted his career and life towards the study of the medical aspect of crime. The problem put to him in this case was one of the most difficult in his professional career.
I'm afraid there's no hope of positive identification of the victim until the missing head can be found. It is, of course, a woman,
But I think if you can give me a little more time, I may be able to help you with some more information. I'm going back to my laboratory now, and I'll be in touch with you later in the day.
Very good, Dr. Stillsbury. Meantime, I'll do everything I can on my side. Of course, there wasn't much to work on except for that bit of paper. Bloody Belgium. I see it spelled Blodie. I wonder what that means.
Although World War I was at its height, London was horrified by the atrocious murder of this unknown woman. The scrawled message on the piece of paper naturally gave rise to the suggestion that the victim was a Belgian refugee. Meantime, the investigation, in the hands of Chief Inspector Frederick Wensley, one of the toughest, shrewdest, and most relentless detectives who ever served Scotland Yard, went forward.
Now, give a knock, Sergeant. More sound? I don't like it. All right, Sergeant, we'll break the door down. Very good, sir. All right, I'll go first. Now, this is the place, all right.
There's an appointment here, sir.
Apparently. All those bedclothes in the corner. Check them over, Sergeant, and see if they match with the sheet we have.
Look, log it, sir. And take a look at this counterfeit, covered with blood.
Yes, I see.
And over here, sir, there's a bucket. It's full of water. Looks as though there's blood in it, too.
Yeah. The murder may have been committed here. All the same, there are one or two things I don't quite understand. We'll get Dr. Bernard Stillsbury along and see what he thinks of it.
It transpired that Madame Gerard had not been seen since 11:15 on the night of October the 31st. In view of Dr. Spilsbury's evidence, it looked as though the inspector was right and that she had been murdered about the time the air raid was in progress. According to witnesses, Madame Gerard had left her flat late that night to take refuge. Back to the flat in Munster Square went Inspector Wensley and his assistants to search it yet again for possible clues.
Here's something, sir.
I found it among the papers on this desk. Now, give it to me. IOU, 50 pounds, spell VOISIN.
Yes,
Voisin.
And it's payable on the 1st of November.
Voisin. I don't think we've heard that name before in this case.
No, sir. That name's been among the witnesses. Ask the landlord to see if he knows anybody called Voisin.
The landlord proved to be a very loquacious man. He most certainly knew Voisin. He knew all about it. He knew all about all the residents in the flats in Munster Square. The difficulty was to keep him on the subject in hand. Voisin, it seemed, used to be a friend of Madame Gerard's husband, who was a French chef, and Voisin, being a butcher, they had much in common. Gerard used to buy supplies from Voisin at his place in Smithfield Market. Then Gerard went abroad to fight for France. Afterwards, then, the landlord, Mrs. Gerard, acted as a sort of housekeeper for Voisin, but now she had been at the present flat for some time. Voisin still lived at Charlotte Street, Fitzroy Square.
It's funny you should ask about Mr. Voisin. I hadn't seen him for some time, but he came round here to the house the other afternoon.
Which afternoon?
Well, it had been the afternoon after Madame Gerard disappeared.
The afternoon before we discovered the body.
That's right, November the 1st it was. He came round in the afternoon just after lunch. Well, I remember what he said to me. Good evening, Mr. Voisin. You're quite a stranger. I haven't seen you for some time. It's about Madame Gerard I have called. I don't think she's in. Come to think of it, I haven't seen her since yesterday. She'll be away for several weeks. Oh, nothing of that, I hope? No. It's nothing important. It's just to tell you that she will be away. Oh, I see. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you that Madame Gerard is expecting a sack of potatoes. And she says, would you be good enough to take them in while they're delivered, you know? Yes, of course I will. And tell Madame Gerard I hope we'll see her back very soon. Yes, I'll tell her that. And that's the last time I see Mr. Voisin.
What else do you know about this man?
Well, I know he's got the key to Madame Gerard's flat because I saw him letting himself in there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, what's more, I reckon it was his money which used to pay her rent.
Have you got any proof of that?
Only she used to pay me every Friday after he'd been to see her. And if he was late or didn't come, then I noticed she didn't pay me until he'd been.
And he used to be his housekeeper?
Yes, sir. But I think they was pretty good friends.
Scotland Yard detectives reconnoitred Voisin's address in Charlotte Street and found that he lived in a basement flat near some stables. Voisin has until recently been a slaughterman employed by a wholesale butcher at Smithfield Market, but was now in charge of his employer's horses. Having sized up the situation, the man from the yard planned a raid. That afternoon, Voisin, together with a woman friend, Bertha Roche, were seated in the living room of their flat when suddenly...
Well, what in the name of the devil? All right, let's hear Voisin. We're the police.
Oh, there I
What do you want?
What the yard wanted was evidence, and Voisin's flat told a terrible story. The doors and walls were spattered with blood. Examination of Voisin's flat left no doubt that it had been the scene of an awful crime. This time, Dr. Stillsbury could confirm the authenticity of the evidence.
All right, Monsieur Voisin. I think you'll have to come along with me to Bow Street. Must she come too? Yes, I shall want the lady as well.
May I pack some of my things?
I'm afraid at the moment I can't allow you to touch anything or take it away with you.
Very well.
Come along now.
While Voisin and Bertha Roche were taken to Bow Street, detectives questioned their neighbors for further evidence. It appeared that on the night of October the 31st, the voices of two women in violent altercation had been heard coming from Voisin's room. This had not commanded much attention at the time on account of the air raid. At about 8 o'clock the following morning, Bertha Roche had been seen by one of her neighbors drawing water from a tap. The neighbor spoke to her and she replied that Voisin had been killing a calf and that she was fetching water to wash his shirt. Voisin was searched and the key to the door of a cellar in Charlotte Street was found in his pocket. Detectives were dispatched to search the cellar, and there, buried in a tub of sawdust, they found the missing head and hands of the murdered woman. Voisin and Bertha Roche were detained at Bow Street for the night, while Wensley carefully considered the evidence against them. It was a matter of common sense that one or the other, or both of them, had murdered Madame Gerard. In view of the medical report, however, the extent to which Voisin might be implicated was uncertain. A test occurred to Wednesday, which would go a long way towards determining the guilt or innocence of Voisin, and he decided to apply it.
Now, Mr. Voisin, I wonder if you'd be prepared to help me. What do you want me to do? Have you any objection to writing the words Bloody Belgium on this piece of paper? No, not at all. There you are. Thank you. Would you mind writing it again? It'll do on the same piece of paper. All right. Thank you. And once again. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, by the way, I see you spell bloody B-L-O-D-I-E. Yes. And you spelled it that way 3 times. Yes. Mr. Voisin, do you always spell it that way? I don't know. Louis Voisin and Bertha Roche, I'm going to charge you with the murder of Amelia Gerard. I must warn you that anything you may say may be taken down as evidence and used at your trial.
2 days later, Voisin volunteered a statement. It was an attempt to adapt his own story to the discoveries he knew the police had made, and at the same time to exonerate Bertha Roche. Dr. Stillsbury had in fact reconstructed the true story of the crime.
The head of the woman was covered with wounds which must have been inflicted with some weapon such as a poker. There were literally dozens of the wounds. There were cuts and bruises on the woman's hands which had been caused as she had tried to ward off the blows that had rained upon her head. Whoever had struck the blows was someone of no great physical strength. The woman died not from the direct effect of the blows, but from loss of blood. She survived the attack for probably half an hour. An examination of the heart indicates partial strangulation. We are therefore able to build up the following picture of the crime. The woman was attacked with a poker or similar weapon by someone of no great strength. She fought for her life and no doubt screamed for help. While blows were still being rained on her, a second person must have thrown something over her head, no doubt with the object of stifling her cries. Next we turn to the question of dismemberment. The body was dismembered by someone of unusual strength, who was accustomed to the use of a knife. The cuts indicate experience of dissection, but no surgical knowledge. We can therefore conclude that two people were concerned in the crime.
And so Dr. Stillsbury, working independently in his laboratory, had reached the same conclusions as Inspector Wensley. Madame Gerard, so far as could be discovered, had never met Bertha Roche, and did not even know of her existence. On the night of the air raid, Madame Gerard had left her flat in Regent's Park and taken shelter in a tube station. The rest can only be surmised, but we can imagine that when the all-clear signal was given, the crowd of frightened refugees was turned out so that the tube station could be closed for the night. Madame Gerard must have made her way to Voisin's room, intending to spend the rest of the night in the security of his cellar. Here she must have found Bertha Roche. The scene between the two women can be imagined. Both had been in a hysterical terror throughout the air raid. Madame Gerard, incensed at the discovery of her rival, may have abused Bertha Roche. She, maddened by the other's taunts, must have picked up the weapon nearest to hand and attacked the intruder. Voisin, sleeping in the next room, must have been awakened by the noise, rushed into the room, thrown a towel around the head of the screaming woman. The blows and suffocation must have continued for some time until finally Amelia and Gerard lay dead. Imagine Voisin and Bertha Roche sitting up all night, talking of ways and means of disposing of the body. And then, next day, Voisin visiting Madame Gerard's flat to lay a false trail of evidence, all to no avail. And finally, Voisin going out on his awful task of disposing of the body. The trial came on at the Old Bailey for Mr. Justice Darling. Stillsbury and Wensley were convinced in their own minds that Bertha Roche must have attacked Madame Gerard, but there could be no legal proof of this. A submission was made on her behalf that there was no case to go to the jury, and the judge gave his ruling.
There is a good deal of evidence against Roche to show that she was an accessory after the fact of the murder. But there is not evidence to prove
that he necessarily took part in the crime itself. I shall therefore direct the jury to return a verdict of not guilty in regard to her.
Bertha Roche was thereupon discharged, and the trial continued with Voisin alone in the dock. The evidence of Dr. Stillsbury decided the case for the prosecution. The jury took only a quarter of an hour to decide that Voisin was guilty. Mr. Justice Darling passed sentence of death in French. On the day before Voisin was executed, Bertha Roche appeared at the Old Bailey and was sentenced to 7 years penal servitude as an accessory after the murder. He died in prison a year later. Oh, and by the way, nobody ever discovered why Voisin wrote those crude words on the piece of paper he left with the body. Those words which were to help to hang him for a murder most foul.